Some killers attack complete strangers. Some target the vulnerable, the young, or the elderly. And some prey on people that they know. There are killers who are inspired by money or by revenge, by sexual deviancy, by hatred. There are opportunists and there are meticulous planners. But what unites these men and women is one simple trait, and it's the most terrifying thing of all. They live amongst us. In our towns, on our streets, in our houses. They're just like the rest of us, but capable of evil. And they could be anywhere. Welcome to Murder Town.
Do you feel it in the air? Oh. Something wicked this way comes. Something wicked this way comes. Something wicked this way comes. Something wicked this way comes.
Every corner of Britain has its dark secrets. And every town has its stories of bloodshed. In this episode, we're in Dartford. It's a commuter town south of London in Kent, better known for its tunnel and bridge. But for more than 20 years, Dartford kept a sinister secret and harboured a vicious murderer.
Once she was in the alleyway, she was trapped.
The severity of her wounds were so bad. I couldn't save her.
People were frightened. Was this person going to do it again?
It was just a very normal day, you know, nothing special about it at all. The weather was very much like this, dark, damp, sort of almost a bit misty. So my colleague and myself, Ron, are now driving along here. We're approaching this set of traffic lights that you can see now.
Michael and Ron were on the outskirts of the town, in the area of Greenhithe.
Here we turned right to come up this road here. That was a pub on our right-hand side, and just here on the left, and I could see someone at the side of the road, gasping for breath, in trouble, on her knees. We can see a young girl on her knees against the wall. Ron runs off to the pub to call for an ambulance, and I kneeled down and I told her my name first, and I said, you know, what's wrong? And all I could hear was her struggling to breathe. I thought she'd been hit by a car. I was worried that there could be damage to her back. I felt her back and I couldn't feel anything, so I laid her down on her back. And it was at that point I could see blood spurting out of her mouth. She was obviously covered in blood on the front in particular. It's impossible to describe what you're going through at that point in time. You know, she stopped breathing within 30 seconds, and it was at that point that I knew I'd got to give her CPR. I tried very hard to get her heart going again, and it didn't matter what I did. I couldn't save her.
Claire was really vivacious. Everybody loved her. She was like the bright, shining star that people were always drawn to.
After what seemed like a long time, an ambulance arrived and they took over, and I just stayed on my knees holding this lady's hand. What we could now see was a young girl, and a few moments later one of the paramedics cut her vest open, and we could see that she'd been very savagely attacked, and they pronounced her dead at the scene. That will be with me for the rest of my life.
Claire Tiltman had been stabbed 9 times and died at 7 p.m. Immediately, the hunt was on to catch her killer. Every part of the UK has its secrets, but there are some places that have earned the title of Murder Town, and Dartford is no exception.
Dartford is an interesting place. It's very close to London. Which perhaps makes you think that it's a really kind of busy metropolitan place. It isn't really. You know, millions of people a month, travel right past it. But very few people, I think, go into Dartford. It's quite a traditional town. And just outside, really just on the outskirts of Dartford, you've got these very close-knit, old-fashioned communities where people know each other. They do have a kind of a traditional village feel to them.
But in 1993, this village feel was shattered when 16-year-old Claire Tiltman was found dying beside a busy road, having been savagely stabbed.
We can see a young girl on her knees against the wall. All I could hear was her struggling to breathe, so I laid her down on her back. They pronounced her dead at the scene. That will be with me for the rest of my life.
We were sitting our mock GCSEs, and so everyone was going into school at different times. It wasn't the normal routine, and so we were allowed the radio on. It kept coming across that a girl had been killed in Greenhithe, and we were like, oh God, we're going to know her, we're going to know her, because we knew everybody.
I didn't have any first-hand information. All I had heard was that a 16-year-old girl called Claire had been murdered. Claire was a popular girl's name, and we'd got several Claires in year 11. And so we found out which one it was.
The teacher came in and switched the radio off. We could tell straight away that it was going to be bad news. And our head of year, Mr. Burgess, came in, followed by a police lady, and he was trying to speak and he couldn't. It was really hard watching him. You felt emotional just seeing the state he was in. So in the end, he said he had some bad news and it was Claire. And then that's when we were told it was being treated as a murder.
I mean, it wasn't just shock and sadness and grief. There was some anger there, and there was a lot of hugging that day.
It's the worst feeling you could never imagine. Just nothing seems to make sense at all. And I just kept thinking of, was she alone and how frightened was she? Was she in pain? All the things that you wouldn't normally have to think about as a 16-year-old.
Claire left her parents' house in Stone to walk down the London Road in the direction of Greenhithe. She's gone up to a local shop to buy some cigarettes. Her parents obviously didn't approve or didn't even know about her smoking. And she then walks back down to the London Road. And at some stage, the attacker obviously saw a figure that would have fitted his profile of victims.
It was firmly established by the police that this is where the attack actually happened. A shortcut through to some houses at the back. It's a dark, dingy little place on a winter's night.
Once she was in the alleyway, she was trapped. There was no way out.
The severity of her wounds were so bad, she could not have moved far in that condition. So, bless her heart, she made it 10, 15 metres before she collapsed onto her knees, which is where Ron and I found her.
We just couldn't understand who or why something like that would happen. You just can't get your head around that at all. For her to be walking somewhere was nothing unusual. I think it was barely even 6 o'clock in the evening when she left home, so this really isn't late. It had to be someone local. We didn't really get anyone come to the area.
Whoever had done this was a vicious, savage attack. That person was still out there, and people were frightened. Was this person going to do it again?
Dartford was scared, and many people believed that it was a local person who had committed the murder. And this wouldn't be the first time that someone local had done something so horrific. In 2001, 2 local teenagers were jailed after setting fire to a homeless man in a Dartford park. One was just 13 years old. And in 2007, David Quatty turned from law student to killer. The son of a High Court judge, Quatty launched a violent attack on a doctor, stabbing her 56 times as she sat in her car on Tainham Road. But it was the murder of Claire in 1993 that would leave the whole town on edge.
Look, in any murder, there's always pressure on the police, quite rightly, to get a result. There's pressure from the public, there's pressure from your senior officers, there's pressure from all around you. This attack would have taken literally seconds. It was a frenzied attack. She was stabbed multiple times. It would not have taken long. He could have slipped across the road, killed her, and then just melted away with the rest of the local traffic, as it were, that was in the area at the time. We were left in a position where there was no forensic evidence or eyewitness in respect of the murder of Claire.
Police had little to go on. Unless someone could come forward, they were working off instinct. But their instincts told them the offender was someone she knew.
Claire was quite brave, and she's not someone that you would think of as a victim. So to then learn that there was no evidence that she'd fought the attacker made it feel like she must have known who it was.
People became apprehensive and fearful about things they hadn't been fearful about before.
Claire was such an ordinary kind of girl. It could have been my daughter, it could have been your daughter, it could have been anyone's daughter.
One parent actually spoke to me about his daughter's paper round and whether or not he ought to follow her at a distance.
Of course people in the area were worried. Parents would be more concerned about letting their children out, especially daughters, on their own. Of course it had an effect on the community.
I would never have gone out on my own again after that, especially not at dark. You would second guess where you would normally walk. There's always cut-throughs to places. It wouldn't have taken them never on your own after that. I still don't, actually.
The fact is, psychopaths haven't got a psycho or anything like it written across their foreheads. They can be normal, good-looking guys, families, children. Sometimes they're very difficult to find because they lead normal lives.
So police were looking for a violent killer. But they had drawn a blank, with no forensic evidence in the alleyway and no witnesses who saw anything suspicious. However, as the police trawled back through old files, they started to wonder, had the knifeman struck before? In December 1988, 5 years before Claire's murder, a 27-year-old was taken from her home on the grounds of Swain Primary School. A man forced her to walk to a nearby quarry where she was raped, strangled with a school tie, and then stabbed and left for dead. The abduction took place just a mile from where the body of Claire Tiltman was found.
These are not common crimes. These are very rare crimes, but we felt that there were so many similarities that, of course, they could be the same offender.
So police are working on the possibility that there is a serial attacker on the loose, prowling the local area. And his crimes have escalated from violent assault to murder. But they still have no idea who he is, and the community is balancing their fear with grief.
It seemed a long time, actually, before the funeral. But the only thing I truly remember is her granddad at the funeral. When the curtains closed, he stood up and started shouting, "No, no, not my Claire," and then he fell to the floor. It was really hard to get your head around. And knowing that there were lots of police all dotted around, they were all watching everyone. It was so surreal, I can't explain it. It was actually quite frightening as well. You don't know who's there.
We filmed the funeral and we went to the Royal British Legion Club where the wake was being held. Her mum and dad were ordinary people. And we interviewed Lynn and Cliff. They found it quite therapeutic to talk and express their feelings and their emotions. The thing that Lynn kept saying was that she'd had a premonition, a very strong feeling that the murderer had been at the funeral. And they'd been scanning the faces of the people there, looking intently at them, wondering which of their friends, which of the people they knew from the community, which of them was the person who murdered their child. We got a call after the funeral from the police who asked us if they could watch the untransmitted footage that we'd filmed at the funeral, which I thought was a strange thing to ask for. We played them the tape and they were obviously looking very, very carefully. The detective sat next to me and they were looking very, very carefully to see who was at the funeral. And there were little bits they asked us to rewind and play again, and they were making notes. They didn't tell us exactly why, but it did start to feel as if, you know, they were very interested in someone who was at the funeral.
Surely the knifeman wasn't brazen enough to attend Claire's funeral. If so, it meant that the killer was part of the Dartford community and could easily strike again. Kent is a county with more than 50 unsolved murders. These violent crimes include stabbings, shootings, and strangulations. But in the early 1990s, cops in the town of Dartford were wrestling with the violent murder of a young girl called Claire Tiltman. They thought the same offender could be behind another attack in 1988. And they were convinced he was local. But as time went on, the trail went cold.
I remember interviewing Claire's mum and dad on the anniversary of the murder. And there just seemed to be no progress with the police investigation.
The apprehension that it still existed was still with us in the school. Some of Claire's friends were seriously affected by the murder.
Things like nightmares, the horrific nightmares, they would stay with you all day the next day. You could shake, you could feel sick, you want to burst into tears or feel really angry about things. Those really raw feelings that you can't explain to people. Yeah, it's actually horrific what it can do.
It was very, very frightening, and there was a palpable sense of fear in the community. And then it happened again.
I was the area detective superintendent covering this part of the county, and had a telephone call in October 1995 to say that there'd been a stabbing of a young lady in the Greenhithe area. She'd have walked down here. The attacker was coming in the opposite direction when he grabbed her, dragged her over to the other side of this bridge, where he then stabbed her several times and she fell to the ground.
The latest incident was under some arches, just 360 metres from where Claire Tiltman had been murdered. Had the Dartford attacker struck once again?
She was a very brave person because she clearly fought off the attack. You know, any one of these attacks, one vital organ, one stab wound to the heart could indeed be fatal. If it hadn't been for the fact that she was very quickly attended to by paramedics and in the hospital, I've no doubt that she could have been fatally stabbed. Fortunately, she survived. And obviously she was in a very poorly state. She was able to give a good account of what happened. She said, every time I screamed, he stabbed me, and every time he stabbed me, I screamed. So I thought, her words, if I stopped screaming and collapsed on the ground, perhaps he'll leave me alone. And that's exactly what he did do. I think the way she acted actually saved her life. I really do. I think he was determined to kill her. The area was immediately cordoned off. Forensic officers would have attended the scene. This area would have been thoroughly searched, both fingertip-wise and forensically. We were dealing with this in very quick time. The roadblock was set up, asking people, anybody who came into the area, whether by car or on foot, whether they'd seen anything, heard anything, knew anything. And it was as a result of that that we managed to very quickly get on to a person of significance.
An eyewitness reported seeing a car belonging to the local milkman in the area around the time of the attack. And police quickly identified him as a young man called Colin Ash Smith.
Colin Ash Smith was a milkman. Apparently he'd tried to join the army and had been turned down. If you didn't know him at all, there was no reason perhaps to think that he was particularly weird, just on the surface. He had a girlfriend, he had hobbies, he used to referee local football matches and that sort of thing. His mum and dad were very well known in the local area, the local community. His mum was a local Labour councillor. But if you did get to know him as neighbours or people, then there was something wrong. There was something sinister. He never went out unless he was carrying a knife.
Police obtained a warrant to search Colin Ash Smith's home. And inside, they found the knife used to attack the girl under the arches. So Colin Ash Smith was the attacker. But what he'd done next defied belief.
After stabbing her a number of times, quite coolly walked away from the scene. It appears he went home, almost certainly took the knife and hid it indoors, and then shortly afterwards has gone to a local pub and played pool. and to then play pool as if, you know, it's just a regular thing to do after stabbing someone is absolutely amazing. It wasn't until after he came out of the pub and arrived at home that he was arrested.
Colin Ashmith was now in custody, but the police had found something else at the knifeman's house, a hidden diary taped underneath a drawer that Colin Ashmith had been keeping since 1988. It contained some of his darkest secrets, dating back to the unsolved attack on a young woman in a remote quarry.
The diary contained details exactly of how he had committed the first attack on this young lady and tried to rape her and left her tied up and used a necktie to try and strangle her, which broke when he was arrested some 6 years later. The part of the tie that had broken off was in the glove compartment of his car. He'd kept that for 6 years. But when he said in the diary he heard the following morning that the victim had survived, he put words to the effect of, "Damn it, I'll make a better job of it next time."
The diary even boasted of plans to kill in a care home and other murderous schemes he was yet to carry out.
I realised they were dealing with someone, a psychopath, who was keeping a record of what he was doing and how he was setting out to kill.
With strong evidence against him, Colin Ashmith admitted he was guilty of stabbing the woman in the Arches and the earlier attack in the quarry in 1988. But what about 16-year-old Claire Tiltman, whose vicious murder was still unsolved?
To be fair, this attack was some 200 to 300 yards away from where Claire had been fatally attacked some 2.5 years earlier. So very quickly the significance of that is apparent, and we were looking possibly at the same person.
It was so close to where it happened with Claire, and so out of the blue, random and so violent, it couldn't have been anyone or anything else, I don't think.
Certainly, Claire's mum and dad were clinging to the hope that this would be a major breakthrough in the investigation. But frustratingly, very frustratingly, there was no mention of the attack on Claire. There was nothing in the diary about her.
Could it be that Colin Ashmith, who had so meticulously kept details of his previous violent crimes, had missed a chance to document his one successful murder? Was Claire Tiltman's killer still on the loose? Could there really be two murderers in Dartford? % of murder victims know their killer. So in 1993, the murder of Claire Tiltman shocked the tight-knit town of Dartford to its core. It seemed that Claire had been the victim of the dreaded stranger attack. But 2 years later, Dartford detectives had turned their attention to another stabbing. This time under some archers yards away from where Claire was killed. The victim survived, and local milkman Colin Ashmith was arrested. Police found a diary confessing to the attack and other crimes, and Ashmith was given 3 life sentences. But crucially, there was nothing connecting him to Claire's murder. There was no mention of it in the diary, and Ashmith was giving nothing away.
I mean, the fact is that he would never, and he did never, admit to anything to do with Claire's murder, either to the officers or to myself. That was extremely galling, to think that this man, who almost certainly in our minds had killed Claire, was not convicted of that offence.
The police case was built on the fact that Ash Smith had committed similar offences. Back in 1993, Claire's parents had a strong feeling that the killer had been at her funeral.
They'd been scanning the faces of the people there, wondering which of their friends was the person who murdered their child.
Unbelievably, the police were now realising that Ash Smith had been amongst the mourners that day.
He was there. He was in the congregation at the funeral, just a few metres away from me and a few metres away from Claire's mum and dad.
The fact is that Colin Ash Smith did in fact know Claire Tiltman because they used to frequent in the British Legion Club.
The Royal British Legion Club is kind of a bit like a village pub, if you like it, or the kind of hub of the community. The Tiltman family came here a great deal, and so did the Ash Smith family. Shortly before she was murdered, Claire came here with her mum and dad to celebrate her 16th birthday. And one of the people who sang happy birthday to her was Colin Ash Smith.
His mother, Diane, was his alibi. She said he couldn't possibly have done it because he was with her visiting a constituent nearby to the scene. Colin Ash Smith's parents were local town councillors. His mother, Diane Ash Smith, was indeed the local town mayor, and Aubrey, her husband, his father, was a town councillor, both actively involved in local issues in the area.
Now, as alibis go, one from the town mayor sounded pretty robust. But when the police looked into it, all wasn't as it seemed. Colin's alibi was false.
His father, and indeed his mother, apparently knew he used to carry a knife around with him. And shortly after the murder of Claire, Aubrey decides to take the knife that Colin carries around with him away and get rid of it. I'm afraid it's like a lot of cases, you know, what people may look like on the outside when they close their front door, you never know what goes on behind closed doors.
So detectives were convinced that Colin Ash Smith was the killer that they'd been hunting. But despite his father disposing of a knife and Ash Smith's other convictions, they didn't have anything to prove he was guilty.
Cliff and Lynn knew who the prime suspect was. They were absolutely certain they knew who it was.
It had such sad long-term effects on their lives. They didn't want to scatter Claire's ashes until a conviction had been made for the murder.
When I went back subsequently to interview them on a number of occasions, you could see that they seemed to be aging visibly, and they both became ill.
The one thing Cliff always said, and I saw him a few months before he died, he said, "I am completely and utterly convinced that you will find and convict the person responsible for killing Claire."
Dartford never gave up hope that the killer of Claire Tiltman would one day be brought to justice. Her friends kept campaigning and police kept appealing. But it would be 2 decades after the crime that Colin Ash Smith would slip up and give the police the clues that they needed.
Colin Ash Smith was, of course, doing a life sentence, and during the course of his incarceration had been talking to a fellow inmate about facts connected with Claire's murder that wouldn't have been known by anybody else. And as a result of some very proactive work by my colleagues and the CPS, they decided that they would charge and prosecute Colin Ash Smith for the murder of Claire. Colin Ash Smith gave evidence in his own trial. He freely admitted he used to carry weapons around with him. He was a man who quite clearly had a problem with women. He had quite clearly had a problem explaining to the court this attack plan, this journal, this diary that he had. And in all honesty, I thought the prosecutor did a wonderful job in showing what sort of individual and psychopath he was.
It was a huge, massive relief of a lot of years of all sorts of emotions. I don't think there was a dry eye, actually, in that whole section of the courtroom.
The community still is haunted by what happened. After all this time, you still meet people in the street who remember clearly what happened and will say, we don't want him to ever come out of prison. We don't want him ever back in our community.
To know that someone's gone out of their way to inflict not just harm to Claire, but to her family and friends, and to destroy more than one life just like that for no reason whatsoever. It's quite sickening.
The day that Colin Ash Smith put the knife into Claire Tiltman is as good as put the knife into her mum and dad.
For 21 years, this crime cast a shadow over the town of Dartford. But the people here, they never gave up. This is a town that strives to be defined by the memories of its victims, as opposed to the murderer that lived in their midst.
Do you feel